2006 was an epic bread year. New York Times food writer at the time, Mark Bittman, did a story on no-knead bread baking with Jim Leahy of Sullivan Street Bakery in New York that went on to become one of the most popular recipes the Times had ever published, and kicked off a tsunami of interest in home bread baking that continues to grow every year. This also happened to coincide with the launch of Breadtopia. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Jim. The whole deal with the no-knead recipe is that anyone can easily make wonderful, open crumb, crusty artisan-style bread at home that's far better in every respect to what you typically find on grocery shelves. And it requires just a few simple ingredients and very little effort. It works on the principle that a wet dough, a high hydration dough, which is what no-knead dough is, doesn't need kneading. Traditionally, you knead dough in order to develop gluten, which gives the bread structure. However, if the bread dough is wet enough, given enough time, the gluten strands magically organize themselves and give the same result as with kneading. Just as an interesting historical side note, while Mark and Jim certainly deserve credit for popularizing no-knead baking, 60 years earlier, Anne Pillsbury of Pillsbury Flour made an amazing discovery, and here's her recipe booklet to document it. Copyrighted in 1945, titled Bake the No-Knead Way, Anne Pillsbury's Amazing Discovery. Never mind that the recipes are horrible and that Anne Pillsbury, like her counterpart Betty Crocker, are fictitious. It's interesting that the idea goes back that far. Here's the best part, I think. In the back of the booklet, a note from Anne with a PS. For copies of the booklet, send 25 cents to Pillsbury's Home Service Center, Minneapolis 2, Minnesota. That's it. No need for zip codes in those days. No knead bread, no need zip codes. In this video, I'm going to show you how I make sourdough no-knead bread. It involves just a few minutes of actual work, if you can call it that, and time does the rest. It couldn't be easier, and the results never fail to please. Now, individual taste in bread ranges all over the place, from light and fluffy white bread to hearty, denser whole grain bread. I'm going to show you something square in the middle, a 50-50 white whole wheat loaf with wide appeal. This is the kind of bread I would bake for an event of some kind. I know pretty much everyone will like it. I've got all the ingredients weighed out here at the gram. Don't worry about taking notes. You can print everything off of our website. I always start with milling my own whole wheat flour. Store-bought flour works too. So here I've got the 50-50 flour mix, water, salt, and yeast in the form of sourdough starter. This happens to be about 2 cups of water. Then I'll stir in the starter. It's a 1/4 cup. And about 2 cups each of white flour and the whole wheat flour that we just milled. The salt. And stir everything up until it's well combined. Now you could actually stop here and come back in 10 to 12 hours when the dough is finished rising. But what I do is let it sit covered for about 10 to 15 minutes and then give it a few seconds of what are called stretch and folds. This helps develop the gluten in place of kneading. Stretch and fold is simply picking up one side of the dough and folding it back on itself. I wet my fingers first so the dough won't stick to them. After roughly 10 to 15 minutes, one more time, wet fingers, and this. The dough has more elasticity now, and the surface develops a bit of a sheen, just looks better. I hope you can get a bit of a sense for the consistency of the dough here. Once you know how you want the dough to feel, you can easily adjust it, if you need to, by adding more flour or water. By the way, this dough is at about an 85% hydration level, meaning that the total weight of the water used in the recipe is 85% of the weight of the flour used, which is pretty high. I go into how it can be useful to know about hydration levels and baker's percentages in the written part of this recipe. Now we just have to come back in 10-12 hours for the final steps. I say come back in 10 to 12 hours, but the time can easily be more or less depending mostly on room temperature. For me, I almost always start the recipe around 8 or 9 in the evening, and it's ready for the next steps around 6 or 7 the following morning. There's quite a bit of flexibility in how all of this actually plays out. Here we are with our batch of dough from yesterday, and it's looking pretty ready. It's risen well, and it's bubbly, poofy. Now I need to degas the dough a bit and shape it for the final proof before baking. The next step is called a coil fold. It's a simple, easy way to further strengthen the dough prior to baking. Before you do the coil fold, have a well-floured cloth-lined proofing basket ready. What I do is I put a little rice flour in, then a little whole wheat flour. That's my routine. Now you want to wet a dough scraper and separate the dough from the edge of the bowl. Then you do this. Moisten your hands and lift the dough up and just put it right back down in the bowl. That's called a coil fold. Do this even twice is sufficient, and then flip it over and into your proofing basket with the seam side up. And I'm going to pinch the seam closed a little bit more. And then it's a good idea to put a little bit more flour around the edges so that when it rises in the proofing basket, the dough doesn't stick to the liner. Then cover it and let it rise for about an hour to possibly as much as an hour and a half. For me, it's almost always 70 to 75 minutes. After this second short rise, it goes into a fully preheated 500 degree Fahrenheit covered baker. You want a baker with high sides to shore up the dough from pancaking out on you. I'll bake with the lid on for about half the bake time, and then take the lid off for the final half. After 34 minutes total bake time, let's check the internal temperature. It's 200 degrees, it's done. Now we just have to wait for it to cool. So there you have it, a pretty decent loaf of bread that probably didn't take more than, I don't know, 10 to 15 minutes total of actual work. Time did the rest. Here's a quick recap. Measure out the ingredients, mix them together, a couple of stretch and folds, go to bed, wake up, coil folds, wait an hour, bake it.